everybody, and welcome to this edition of LiR Confidential on lirmedia.tv. And our email is info@lirmedia.tv. And I can't tell you how excited we are here at LiR Media to have with us today in studio, all the way from Washington, Ileana Johnson. Welcome, Ileana, to the program.
Thank you, Pat, for having me, and hello to all the viewers.
Indeed, Ileana. Oh, Ileana is with the name, of course, the name you're probably all thinking, I was looking where she found it. Well, Ileana grew up and lived the first 20 years of her life in Romania. And she came to America in 1978. So you know that she lived under the Ceausescu regime in Romania at the time. She became a naturalized citizen in 1982, and she speaks German, Italian, French, and Romania, and she has Romanian. She has understanding of French, Spanish, and German. She's a senior columnist for the Canada Free Press, and she has multiple appearances on radio and TV, commentating on all things economics and politics, political views as well. And she has taught economics for over 30 years in America, and we can go through all of that. Ileana, again, I say welcome. That's a huge amount you've packed in already, and we won't tell anybody our own ages, but we grew up in the same decade.
Of course.
We have that in common. But tell us now, I remember the headlines. I remember the headlines in 1989 with the photographs of Ceausescu and his wife, you know, shot in the courtyard of wherever they were shot, right?
Yes.
And of course, you'd have heard the odd story now and again, but more or less nothing that was about to unfold when they got rid of him, and the horrific and horrendous stories that came out of that country. How did you fare, your family fare, growing up in Romania as a young girl under that?
Well, first of all, nobody in my immediate family was a member of the Communist Party. So in addition to being part of the proletariat and poor, my parents were blue-collar workers. We had very, very low income, so we were living on subsistence level standards. In other words, our pantry was always bare, and we did not have a refrigerator. Our windowsill was the refrigerator in wintertime. And in summertime, we just shopped from day to day to eat, if we could find food in the long lines that we all had to join in order to find something that mother could cook. So it was a very poor life, probably worse than any person living in this country in the last 50 years.
And tell me, during that era in Romania, which of course we must look at it, it was closed. The country was closed for all intents and purposes, insofar as you couldn't get out.
Yes.
Even if you wanted to get out. And of course, they were enabled to be like that because they always had Mother Russia to look after them, or to apply muscle if they needed muscle. Would that be true to say?
Yes. As a matter of fact, the country became communist, actually socialist. It was the Socialist Republic of Romania. It became socialist under the leadership of a small number of Communist Party members after World War II, after the monarchy, because the Russian army invaded and fanned across the country all these Bolsheviks who pushed by force people to become socialists, to give up everything they owned for the public good, for the common good. And those who didn't, who objected, of course, they were either imprisoned, tortured, or executed.
And your mom and dad, did they, if you don't mind me asking, how did they fare out? Your dad and your mom, were they, what's the word I'm saying, able to move around, able to get around, or were they sympathetic, or had they any choice in the matter? to the regime?
Well, no, they had no choice in the matter, and everybody was pretty much part of the proletariat class. So we were kind of equally miserable, equally poor. It didn't matter if you had a college degree or not, or
Yeah.
if you just were a mechanic like my dad. We all lived about the same, and whatever house you may have had in the country or a bit of land was all confiscated. If you had gold, savings, it was all confiscated. And we were forcibly moved to these concrete block apartments that were about 450 square feet.
Goodness me, of course, a lot of those were definitely around Russia as well, so they didn't have far to look for their examples. And the population in general in Romania, was there much opposition then to that from, well, you grew up, of course, and then did you get some education in Romania before you left?
Yes, there was opposition, of course. It was stronger in areas where there were mountains and forests that a person could hide or they could hide weapons, but they were isolated cases and they were snuffed out. In the cities, the guns had been confiscated, so there was no opposition. There was underground distribution of some information, and then there was Voice of America informing us. Yes, and we were educated free for free in the public schools. But if you left, like I did, I had to pay back my education. So it was free, I guess, until the Communist Party decided that you had to pay it back.
Right.
Even higher education was free, but there were so few seats, and the Communist Party members' children had priority to these seats, and the rest of the students had to fight for the remaining seats. And you could be declined even with a, a perfect score in high school.
And
Um,
of
so
course,
yes, and I was educated. That's where I started studying foreign languages and economics, and I completed my education in the US and received 4 degrees.
yeah, I was reading that, but the education system, if you could get into it, was pretty all right, was it?
Yes, it was very good. We got a good mathematical, scientific education, some truthful history. Of course, there was some manufactured history to fit the Communist Party platform, but in general, we got a good education. We had to suffer through classes such as scientific socialism, which was ridiculous. I remember when I showed a professor here in the US my transcript, and every year I had scientific socialism and some other type of indoctrinating course. And he said, well, we don't accept communist courses here. Now they would probably give me 6 to 12 hours for that credit. I mean, they would be so elated at the universities in the US, which
Really?
is hard to believe. Yes.
Oh my goodness me. Of course, that's another topic we'll come on to maybe later on about the university system in America, which I suppose for someone like you who've seen it all, so to speak, it must be very disturbing the way education is going in America
Oh,
at,
it is.
at university level.
Even universities, I studied in the South of the United States, and they were more conservative at the time. This was in the early 80s. But now, even my own alma mater, the College of Education magazine for the alumni is called Forward. For the viewers, Forward was both a German and a Stalinist motto for their regime. So why would you name an education magazine in the US with such a title?
And we only get a glimpse of it here through different. Well, if you're not inquisitive like I'm inquisitive, thank God, you listen to an awful lot of media streams across the platforms. But of course, going back to Romania in the 1970s, there was no internet and no Wi-Fi or anything like that, so you had to rely on outside information with the radio stations that you could pick up, or the television station if you had a television.
Well, we didn't get a television set until I was in 11th or 12th grade, and it was black and white. and it only broadcast two stations. One, which was the main propaganda station, and then there was one for Saturday and Sunday when they may have a cartoon for children or a puppet show for quote unquote entertainment. But there was always a lesson towards communism even behind those shows. However, during the one program, which was the most propagandist of all, the Ceausescu regime's channel, they actually gave us once a week in the evening the show. I don't know if you're familiar with it in Ireland, Dallas.
Yes,
And I think they meant it, I don't know how it escaped the censors. They meant it as to show how decadent capitalism is,
yes,
but
yes.
in reality, it gave people hope that there were other ways to live than just oppressed and in fear all the time like we did.
Now that you said that, Ileana, the Dallas, so Dallas was a mixture of so many different parts of society in America, of the filthy rich and the people who are trying to make it now. So, as you said, how did it get through the system? You know, at least you had a
I don't
team.
know. I have a good story, another good story about that. Um, in the 70s, before I came to the US, there
Yeah,
was a highly popular book written by a gentleman. Nobody would recognize him, but it was called America's Greyhound. And it was his telling the story of being invited at this Midwestern university to see America. It was sort of like a fellowship type of invitation. So he and his wife had gone on a Greyhound bus and they visited much of the United States on the cheap, so to speak. And he wrote his impressions, and they were actually very accurate. And several years ago, about 4 years ago, I got the opportunity to meet this man. I had actually brought the book to the US with me in
oh, yes.
1978, and it was all tattered. So we had a session at the Romanian embassy, and I asked him to sign it for me. And he said, "Oh my God, you brought this with you to the US?" He said, "I was told that this book prompted about 50,000 Romanians to defect to the West." And I said, "Well, my mother defected, so it prompted her because she didn't have time to read the book, but I told her about it." And incidentally, his wife has opened the first memorial museum to the victims of communism, not just in Romania, but all over the world. It's in Sighet, which is northern part of Romania.
Oh,
And
really?
she was a poet. And I asked him, how did it escape the censors, this book? He said, I would never know to this day how.
Goodness me. And have you been back since?
Well, I went back to 1985 with my oldest child because I wanted to see my dad. He was left behind. My mother defected in 1980 or 81. And so I took my almost 5-year-old child and we went to visit, and we were there for a month. And every day it was a struggle to find food for the three of us, for my dad, for me, and my daughter.
My goodness.
And my daughter, to this day, she's 40 years old, she still remembers having been there and how we were driven in this radial car of my cousins to find a place that would have food for us. And she remembers that. And she remembers all the police and the weapons. And she remembers quite a bit. So obviously it made a very scary impression on her at the time.
And today now in Romania, have you been back in modern times at all?
Yes, for the longest time, I wouldn't go back because in 85 was one of the worst times during Ceausescu's reign.
Yeah.
They were actually telling people how many calories they could eat a day. They had worse rationing cards and so forth. So anyway, I wouldn't go back. And my husband literally dragged me to go in 2011. And we were in the airport in Bucharest, and I was crying because I didn't want to go back. That's how afraid I was.
Yeah.
And once I went and I saw that actually people had food now, and things were improving, and they were building churches, et cetera, et cetera. I went several times after that.
Right. And of course, Romania today is a part of the European Union.
Yes, since 2007.
And so I suppose that alliance, economic, or it's supposed to be an economic alliance, but it has improved. I know here in Ireland, I can only speak of since I live in Ireland, that it most certainly did propel us into the 20th century, economically speaking, and infrastructurally speaking in Ireland as a result of our membership of the EU. Now, there's a lot of politics, as we know, that people wouldn't agree with. Overall, economically, we did improve as a country in Ireland. I dare say it has helped Romania as well.
Of course, tremendously. And during the Trump administration, they have reopened some of the military bases that had been shuttered and abandoned, and they rebuilt the roads and the infrastructure for that. And there's a American military presence there now in the vicinity, proximity of the Black Sea, which is a good policy. I don't know if this new administration will continue that.
We don't know about the new administration yet. We'll have to give them, what's the word I'm looking for, time. But we'll get into that down in a minute, because I'd like to ask you a question. Since you live in Washington, you should have. Now, tell me, you must have been good, I won't say at figures, but economics. I mean, I remember one of the first books I got that turned me onto economics was John Kenneth Galbraith's Age of Uncertainty. And when I read that book, you know, I won't say he made economics sexy, but I mean, his ideas, did you come across him in your studies?
I have, of course, for 30 years, I had to teach from textbooks that were picked by the dean. So we focused on Keynesian economics. We did
Yes.
have some references to other economists, but basically I taught principles of economics 1 and 2, which is macro and microeconomics, and based on the views of Keynesian economists. So yes, of course.
And would you consider it sort of a very narrow focus for the subject?
Well, you mean you want me to give an example, or?
No, from Keynesian.
Well, basically, Keynesian economists are currently, or followers of Keynesian economists are what is happening in American economy today. So,
Would you say that?
yeah, I would say so. Yes.
So it's
Of
full,
course, we're
full blown.
headed towards galloping inflation with all the out
Yeah,
of control printing of money without backing of any goods and services, of course.
Exactly, making the small, tiny percentage richer and the majority poorer. Is that good economics, I wonder?
Well, you know what they say, that a rising ship lifts all souls, but even the poorest person in this country is still better off economically than anybody else in the world. And I know there are arguments that people live better in Switzerland, they live better because they have per capita GDP is perhaps higher, but I'm talking about the middle of the range, economic range population, lower middle class, and so forth.
Now,
they do live better than other people in other countries. And I know because I have traveled extensively and I have seen their standard of living.
And when you compare, obviously you can't compare one country with another because it depends on what kind of government, but nevertheless.
It also depends on what variables you take into account. Sometimes they take very esoteric variables into account, which cannot really be measured. They're specific to that particular country and to that particular culture.
So can you not measure happiness economically?
No, you cannot.
Yeah.
And you cannot measure satisfaction either.
Well, you can if your bank balance is very big.
I guess, I suppose so. But I've met
But
some very rich people who are very, very unhappy.
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, but it's incredible to me in the 21st century that a country like the United States, and there are many, many things about America. I don't have to tell you; you're there long enough to know that it's a fantastic country, and I think by and large the people are fantastic. You know, and they're so positive by and large, generally speaking. But there's no maternity leave. There's no
There's no
social welfare system like
um,
modern countries have.
are you talking about the welfare system now,
Yeah,
or?
yeah, now today.
Yeah, we have a pretty extensive welfare system. It's just that the welfare does not go necessarily to American citizens. It goes to newcomers who just cross the border easily, and they become automatically eligible for a lot of generous welfare, sometimes more than the Americans make working full time.
Now, and you have no maternity leave in the 21st century.
There's no, well, there is 6 months leave, 6 months, 6 weeks maternity leave, but that means certain companies do pay and others don't. So there's not such a generous 6 month leave as it is in Europe. I
But
totally agree.
we would consider
Also,
it.
people cannot become eligible immediately for vacation the first year they start employment. They have to build up to it, which is totally different from Europe.
Yeah, we would consider ourselves very progressive in that respect, that social
Yes.
aspect of it. But in America, if I lose my job in the morning in America, do I get state help?
Yes, you do. You just have to leave your pride at home and just go apply. But sometimes the ones who came across the border are ahead of you, and there are long lines and long wait. But yes, you can get help.
Yeah, and I mean, the last President Trump's and his 4 year reign, they got an awful lot of stick from a huge sections of the media because of the fact that they were trying to put some kind of control on immigration, which I thought overall every single country has their own laws and regulations, you know. I mean, I cannot just pick up in the morning and fly to any country I like and live there, you know. Countries have laws,
Exactly.
whether you agree with them or not, they have laws that must be obeyed and adhered to. I couldn't fly over to Kennedy Airport in the morning and stay in America.
No.
I mean, people, I think it's as basic as that, and people lose sight of that fact, you know, that for all those criticisms they got, I thought they were trying to get a handle on immigration. That's all they were trying to do, in my opinion. I know.
I think so. I agree with you because uh, Congress people, for the sake of political gain and getting votes, they were advocating that people who walk across the border or who are here illegally should get immediate priority and amnesty, which I suppose if you've been here 20 years, perhaps you should be amnestied at some point. But then there are 4 million people who are still waiting the legal dispensation of their legal files. And some of them have waited as long as 10 years, 15 years to become legalized Americans or to receive legal status. So why should they go to the back of the line because they could not jump the border, and given priority to those who could jump the border?
Right. And I know there's a lot of Irish as well, of course, being from Ireland. There's, well, not as much as there used to be now. There's quite a few Irish still haven't reconciled their status in the United States, for the want of a better description. And of course, does it apply today in the United States? If I went to America and I married an American citizen, I'd be fine.
Um, Yes, except you will run into the same bureaucracy, which is being slowed down on the legal side of it by the fact that they're giving priority to all the illegal ones wanting to
But
get.
I could stay in the country.
Yes, you could. You still have to start the process and
Yeah,
all of that.
of getting your own individual status recognized.
Eventually you will, yes.
Yeah. My special guest is Ileana Johnson from Washington via Romania and on LiRmedia.tv and LiR Confidential. And our email is info@lirmedia.tv. Now, Ileana, you wrote a book, Echoes of Communism. And I only came across it since I would just glance at it online, but I will get it, I'll tell you that much, because how did that go down in the United States, that book?
Well, for the longest times, it had just weak sales because I don't have any advertising at all. It just sells at Amazon. And I had a follow-up to that, Communism 2.0, which is my going back after 25 years. But recently, since all these developments of the government actually pushing fully socialism in this country, all of a sudden, everything that I wrote relating to communism is selling like hotcakes. And it's not just selling in this country, but it's also selling in the UK, it's selling in Ireland, it's selling in New Zealand, Australia, all the English-speaking first world countries. So I was surprised because I thought that the people who needed to hear from this probably will never read the book. And I'm referring to all the high school and college students who get this romanticized version of socialism and communism the moment they hear the word free. So obviously people are beginning to wake up that this type of socialism is not the socialism that exists, let's say, in Ireland within the government, or the socialism that exists in the Nordic countries, which young Americans admire. It is an entirely different type of socialism.
Of course it is, yeah. And did you teach economics in either, was it high school or university?
I had both groups, mostly in a university, but I also had gifted students from high school.
And when you were teaching economics in university, because there's a huge, what's the word I'm talking about? I think, and I look at it from this remove, at this side of the Atlantic, there's a huge deficit of free thinking, free thought in the universities in America, you know?
It is. It was a little bit freer. We still had academic exchange of ideas between conservative and non-conservative professors. Of course, even then, the majority of professors were non-conservative. So there were a few libertarian or conservative ones, maybe 10, 15% or less. But we still had discussions. Now, if you want to go to a university and have a discussion, whether it's with colleagues or with students, it is impossible. You will be boycotted. You will potentially be attacked verbally and physically.
That's right.
And the police may or may not intervene to break things apart. So it's very difficult now. The universities are no longer the place for exchange of ideas and acceptance of divergent opinions.
And do you think gender studies is a subject at all in university?
Gender studies, is it a hard subject? I think it's a ridiculous subject, and most people cannot get a job with such a degree.
No, I'm just being the devil advocate here, but I agree with an awful lot what you say. Like this, when I hear gender studies, I'm not picking on that. I'm just picking on the evolution of nonsensical ideology, for the want of a
It
better
is. It's
word.
a nonsensical ideology that's not based on reality, and it's not based on biology. So we'll leave it at that.
That's true, and the same with what about God, you know, do you despair sometimes at the education system as a general thought?
Well, if you pursue a degree in science, whether it be physics, chemistry, biology, you're still going to get a good, solid education in America. If you studied anything else, it's akin to being indoctrinated into a Marxist platform of gender studies, social justice, and racial justice, and transgenderism, all kind of lumped into one.
I mean, the most, I suppose, erudite man I heard recently, or fairly recently, speaking about race was Denzel Washington. I have the highest regard for Denzel. He's one of my
I
heroes.
just said,
He's one of my heroes. He said, stop talking about it. And when you think about it, stop talking about it, then there won't be an issue with it. You know, that's one of the things he was saying. I think he's a fantastic man myself, you know, Denzel Washington.
I totally agree. And on that vein, my students, my college students, and I taught some night classes or evening classes, and I would have traditional students and I would have non-traditional students who had a job during the day. And they always complained about the textbook. And I think the dean used Baumol and Blinder's Principles of Economics, which is probably now, since I retired, probably in the 20th edition. Anyway, it's the beloved liberal version of John Maynard Keynes' economics. But the students would ask, because they were smarter than the traditional students,
Yes.
why are there all these statistics in the textbook dividing us into race, gender, ethnicity? Why can we not talk about economics of people, of humans?
Yeah, human. Yeah.
Yeah, of humans. Why all this division? And my answer was always this: well, ask the dean and ask the writers of the textbook, because they are the ones who wrote the textbooks. And then another complaint I had, well, you make us buy a book that costs $200 and you very seldom use it unless it's the graphs in the book, because I used my own sourced materials.
Right.
And I taught the concepts, but not exactly what was in the book. And first of all, I didn't select the book. And secondly, I want to give you a reality-based economics coming from the view I've had the experience with communist economics, socialist economics, and the economy as it is presented in America, a first world economy. So those were the complaints. Obviously, I had no power to change, but I could get around using the textbook, except the graphs, which the students hated.
Yeah, and of course, you live now in Washington. And,
yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you were around during the march that time.
Yes, I was nowhere near it. I did not want to be part of it. I did not want to attend. And I was not going to make the 24-mile effort to go.
and
because I knew that nothing good was going to come out of it.
You know, what I looked across as many of the media platforms I could get my hand on. By and large, 99% of it I thought was peaceful.
Yes, it was. I had friends who went, and they said that before the actual march, so-called, or protest started, the people who actually caused the violence were already in place, and they were already using some kind of smoke bombs, and the wind was dissipating them quickly. As the wind died down, they became more noxious to the people who were closer to these, who actually escalated the walls of the Capitol and broke windows. And then they were actually let in by the Capitol Police.
Yeah, which I found very, very strange altogether. But anyway, look, we'll never know the real truth of the thing, but maybe in some history book down the line we might know. But it was unfortunate. I thought myself, the trouble was by minority. The trouble should never have happened. It didn't look
Yes.
like there was enough police there. But all of that said, I think that the media went way, way, way overboard afterwards. Way over.
Yeah, it was just blown out of proportion, the size of it. Most of it was peaceful, and those who were not peaceful were not elements that belonged to the
The general.
majority of the people there.
Yeah, I think that's from what some people I spoke to, different people across the divide, even Democrats, dare say, that, they all agreed it was a small, small, tiny element, but yeah, you have to sell newspapers and you have to sell advertising space on these cable networks to make their money. So there you go. Now, you yourself, what do you think of the media in general, Ileana, in the United States today? I mean, you participate, say, in what's the one thing on top of it? Canada Free Press.
Yes. There was a time when I, along with everybody else, actually believed what the media told us during the news hour. And we didn't think that there was any gain from lying to the general population. But in the last 12 years since I've lived in this area, I have seen a constant devolving of the media into basically a lying source of misinformation, or a source of misinformation, not the truth, and the opinion of talking heads, some of whom have journalism degree. And I know for a fact that getting a journalism degree is probably on one of the easiest degrees on American campuses, and they don't really have to pass any difficult classes. So I don't have very high regards for these so-called journalists, and knowing that they are distorting history and they're distorting the truth constantly and just giving us their opinion, or the opinion of the day that has been sent from the mothership that day. And when I say mothership, I mean the Democrat Party. Then I have no respect for the media. I do respect a few outlets that actually still report the news without their personal opinions, such as One American News. But those
But
are few and far between.
yeah, we get that here now as well, and I've been dipping into that lately. OAN, One American News. I find it I find it okay, myself.
Yeah,
And
it's okay.
I was a big fan one time of NPR.
I
Um,
was too, but not anymore.
I was a very big fan, and let me put my cards on the table. I was a very big fan of NPR, and I did think in the 70s and 80s they were highly regarded, and rightly so.
Yes, they were, and I was a fan too in the 80s, but they started changing in the 90s, and that's when I dropped my um, respect.
Yeah, good word. And PBS as well, of course, is another one that I
Yes,
that I dip into. PBS, but I like CBS and NBC. I like some of the. I know we're all harking back in history. You think that your mum and dad were better than anybody else, and the old journalists like Walter Cronkite and all of those. But they were real journalists. They
they
would not.
were, and nobody knew that Walter Cronkite was a liberal
Yeah,
because he kept his personal politics out of reporting the news.
absolutely. And they ran with no story without getting three independent verified sources, whether it was print or broadcast. And they'd wait and wait and wait for that. And then they'd go with the story.
It has gotten so bad now, Pat, when I actually write an article, and I wrote a recent one on Karl Marx's 10 tenets from the Communist Manifesto. And I took each one and explained how his academic ideas were actually implemented in Romania, how I experienced it.
Yeah,
Well, I have a lot of trolls who are paid to follow me when I write things. And of course, they make commentaries which show to me that they have not, number one, read the article. They don't know what they're talking about, but they're accusing me of being a propagandist because I don't have quoted sources. Of course, when it's I am the source, is my opinion. I lived, I experienced it. I don't need some kind of millennial journalist who was probably not even alive when I was living through communism, socialism, communism, to tell me that I need a source, a secondary source.
I mean, you can put yourself over in Romania and be writing this stuff and be told that you're not a credible source, even though, as you said, I lived the damn thing, you know, I lived it, you know.
Yes, I am the source.
Yeah,
So
I lived
don't
it.
tell me I'm a propagandist when I left my country that I loved and my family and everything I knew behind to escape to a free country. Who in his right mind would do that unless the country was so oppressive with barbed wire to keep us in?
Now, when you were teaching in university, did you come across many Che Guevara T-shirts?
Yes, I have. I'm so glad you asked that question. I had one particular student who brought one to class every week. So I finally told him, I said, you know, this is who Che Guevara was, and he did this, this, and that. Would you believe that after that, more students in class showed up with Che Guevara t-shirts? He did not stop, but more followed. So years after that, I've been retired for a while.
Yeah.
A few years ago, that student contacted me through Facebook and apologized for his boorish behavior because he now finally understands the consequence of what that man did and what he did by wearing the t-shirt. And I even tried to explain to him, people like Che Guevara and his henchmen killed my dad in Romania in '89, and it didn't faze him. So telling these young people the truth does not faze them. They have to mature and experience it on their own skin in some way before they believe.
Absolutely, because there are there are plenty heroes in history that you can latch onto, that young people can latch onto, you know, plenty of them if they only look around and give it some thought. My special guest today is Ileana Johnson from Washington. Now, Ileana, you wrote another book called Liberty of Life Support. The title intrigued me, The Liberty of Life Support. That was 2012, as I did down on my notes thing.
Liberty on life support. Yes, this was during the time when there were so-called fundamental transformations of our economy by the Obama administration. And I looked at different areas or sectors of the economy and how they were being affected by his administration's plans of this fundamental transformation and their promise that all good times are behind us and we're never going to have any GDP growth larger than 1.5%. And he had unemployment numbers higher and higher quarter after quarter. So I looked at all these different statistics and trends, and I wrote different chapters to explain why this was bad for America and why they were trying to destroy American exceptionalism. And I don't know, I don't think it sold very well. Again, I did not have a lot of advertising, and a lot of people are economically illiterate, if I may be so bold to say that,
well,
and
no,
they don't want to learn.
That's a truism in every country, you know?
I don't know. When I was growing up in Romania, there were people who were quite economically literate out of necessity because they were so poor and oppressed. They had to learn, they had to school themselves. And of course, we had a good education in school, which is not happening here anymore. We had better education in high school in Romania than the students have today in America at the bachelor's level in college.
Of course, Ileana, you were in America during the Reagan years.
Yes, I was.
Of Ronald Reagan. And I spoke recently to a gentleman from San Francisco who served in his cabinet, you know, which was insightful enough for you. I'll send you the link myself to the program You might, although I mean, he is a registered Democrat all his life, but Reagan and Reagan's legal advisor went after him because, you know, he was given the job because of his ability to do the job, which I thought was good as well. Anyway, but the Reagan years growing up in America, it's easy to look back at things with rose-tinted glasses, but was there a better confidence and excitement in America under Reagan, do you think?
I thought so. Of course, I was busy studying for my doctorate, so perhaps I didn't pay as much attention, but it seemed that the attitude of my colleagues at the university, because I was teaching then as well, was more benign and understanding towards people of opposing views or people of opposing parties. There was not this visceral hatred between those who are Democrats and those who are Republicans, and people could actually meet in the middle. And some of the Democrats were truly classical liberals, who actually had good arguments for their points of view, as opposed to the majority of Democrats today, among the population, of course, who look at the Democrat Party as the party of free stuff. So I think it was a better view of that era of the Reagan administration. I mean, and of course, he made mistakes. He wasn't perfect. No human being is perfect.
Every president has made mistakes. We know that, but it's the ones.
Just like Mr. Trump made mistakes, and he was not a perfect human being. That's not why people voted him in. He actually brought the economy to tremendous growth, which the previous administration, the Obama, said that, oh, the new normal is 1.5% GDP growth, and Mr. Trump proved him wrong. And now we're going back to that Obama era because a lot of the appointees seem to be retreads from the Obama administration.
I know, I was looking at that myself as being a political nerd that I am, and I cannot understand why an administration, well, in my opinion, this is my opinion, not the opinion of LiR Media, I thought Obama was the worst president in my lifetime so far.
He was.
From this side of the Atlantic.
Economically speaking, he was the worst president.
And so to pick people from that cabinet who served in that for 8 years, and of course, they elected a president who served as vice president in those 8 years. So when it starts at the top, it can only get better as it goes down along the line, you know. But I don't know, Ileana, what's in store for America in the next couple of years. But I don't know really, you know. And it's still a fantastic country of opportunity. Now, the book Liberty and Life Support. What prompted you to write that, as you said, apart from the Obama thing? And how did that go into university? Did you get into many universities or libraries with it or anything? How's the system there?
I did. The book is, like I said, different chapters deal with different aspects of the economy, and I had hoped that people would understand that the administration in the first 4 years was very disastrous for the economy, was disastrous for American exceptionalists. It was disastrous for the international policies that they were pursuing. And I had hoped that he would not be reelected, but I was wrong. So it's still a good book because it has a record of everything that has happened, economically speaking. And I wrote it in layman's terms. I did not use too many economic terms that would kind of leave people scratching their heads.
I say, Ileana, I don't know, I'm not being disparaging at all to the man, but I don't think anybody could elect the president called Mitt Romney, who didn't he run against Obama?
Right.
I don't think they were ever going to elect Mitt Romney to that position. I think the Republicans lost the trick. It's easy to look back, of course, and make those points, you know. But
Well, personally, I already miss Mr. Trump because um, the new administration has already killed thousands of jobs in the first day, actually in the first afternoon. So,
they made a decision, and there's always for and against these things, but they made a decision to close down this massive project between America and Canada.
yes, the Keystone XL pipeline, which immediately killed thousands of jobs, and especially the Union of Pipe Fitters, who actually voted for Mr. Biden. And not to mention that now we're going to have to import oil from Saudi Arabia and transported with tankers, which have to use fossil fuels to get here. And they dump all their oily bilge in the ocean, contributing to pollution and et cetera, et cetera. So it was all around bad policy. The gasoline prices are going to go up. They already have by 50 cents in some places. So people just don't understand that these things have serious consequences for their pocketbooks because they are economically illiterate.
And did you find when you came to America, and how many in your family? 2 or 3? Is it 2? 2 children you have, is it?
I have 2 children. Well, actually, we have 3.
3, yeah. But did you find that, personally speaking, the going tough for you to assimilate into society in America when you came there and you married, etc., with kids and so forth?
When I came here, it was very difficult to assimilate. I don't know about the public in Ireland, but here in the US, there's a very popular show called 90 Day Fiancé, and it kind of puts on the screen all these foreign people who become fiancés of Americans. And there are all these tremendous clashes of cultures that surely people can anticipate, but they're worse or not so bad depending on what culture that person is coming from. So try to imagine that coming from communist Romania, 1978, moving to the southern United States. So there were tremendous cultural clashes and problems of assimilation and adaptation and accommodation and whatever you want to call it. It probably took about 3 years, even though I spoke English, I spoke British English, not American English. That's what I learned in school. So it was quite difficult.
English, yeah.
And then when I had children later on in this country, it became easier because I could concentrate on teaching them Romanian as well as English.
And your kids went to school in America?
Yes, they were born and raised in the South.
And they're all grown up now?
Oh yeah, they're both grown up, and they're fluent in Romanian and obviously English.
Oh, fantastic. And do they live beside you, or are they far away?
They're far away, fortunately. But our son is close by. He lives in Washington.
Oh, there you go. There you go. And they turned out okay, as they say here in Ireland,
They turned out very well. I'm so very proud of them. Yes.
Yeah, that's all one can hope for as a parent, my son, as a grandparent and all, is that they have good health, and they try to do the decent thing most of the time,
Of course.
You tell me before we finish up, when are you going to come to Ireland? When are we going to see you in Ireland? And
I've never been to Ireland, and I was talking to my husband and my friend Alice, who is Irish.
Yes.
When are we going to Ireland? So hopefully whenever they lift the COVID restrictions, I'd like to come to Ireland and Scotland.
And we'll be going the other way as soon as they lift them as well, to go to visit Alice. She's been such a fantastic person. And
she is. I love her.
She's such a positive person. That's what I'm thinking of.
She is.
Positive against horrific adversity at times, but really, I'll tell you, I admire her anyway. That's one, and she knows that anyway here and there. I
do too.
Because we started off this company at the worst of times. We were just getting up and running when the country was closed. When the COVID. How is the COVID situation affecting you over there, Ileana, on your day-to-day basis?
I live in a state, of course, we actually live in Northern Virginia, which is it's supposed to be the Commonwealth of Virginia, but it's like the Commonwealth of Socialist Virginia. Everything is Democrat in this state. And so we are really, he just extended our lockdowns. So we can go to the grocery store with masks, or we can go to the mall with masks. But because the economy is in dire straits, people just don't know it yet. We have a lot of stores that have closed, went bankrupt. You go to the mall and a third of it is empty. Um, the variety that we used to have in merchandise no longer exists. The companies are cutting back whatever they were making before and just sticking with basics. So you go to the store, we have a grocery store nearby, Wegmans out of New York,
Yeah.
and they're having real trouble with distribution of food. So their shelves are still partially empty, but what they do, they just kind of spread out other things on the shelf so it doesn't look empty. But I know better, it is empty
Yeah, and
of
we
certain
you know,
products.
it's so sad in a way because we have the exact same situation here in Ireland where there are businesses closed now who we all know, we don't have to be economists. They'll never again open. They will not open.
No. And people like nursing homes are locked down. I can only go see my mother through a glass
What
wall.
age is your mom?
My mom is 89.
Yeah, I lost my mum there before Christmas. She was 91 in a nursing home as well, you know. And,
Yeah. And I think the number one reason, or the number one mistake Mr. Trump made, and which caused him to lose the election, among other things, was the fact that he gave so much power to Dr. Fauci in the beginning. And he came on television time and time again, scaring the bejesus out of the American public. And now it's almost like a modified society. People no longer make eye contacts when they meet in the street. And even though they have masks on and they're 6 feet apart, they move out of the way even more. I go to the woods and I meet one or two person and they're wearing masks near us, or some of them go into the bushes to avoid being on the same path, which is 6 to 9 feet wide. It's just absolutely insane. And I noticed recently people wear two masks instead of one, or they wear a mask and a shield. And it's just this abject fear and irrational fear of dying. And I don't understand that. If I could just get away with being able to go into a store without being thrown out, I would not wear a mask at all.
Yeah. Well, it's not mandatory here to wear a mask
It is here.
going into the store, and they haven't. Well, in saying that now, they could be taking the step, but they haven't taken the step. So I go into some shops, I don't wear a mask, not because I don't want to wear a mask, because if I don't have to, I won't wear it. You know, it's as simple
Well,
as.
it's actually worse for our health. My oldest daughter last year, because she wears a mask 8 hours a day, she had a really bad bacterial lung infection from the mask, which required treatment. And everybody who's wearing a mask has increased allergies from it.
And Ileana, before we finish up, do you think that America itself, politically, ideologically speaking, is moving towards some form of socialism, or could be?
Moving towards socialism?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're making accelerated steps as we speak. Some states are quicker moving into that direction, others slower. But here in Virginia, we're way ahead of the pack. We're so socialist. It's not even funny. Yeah, America will be socialist in the near future.
And would that be so?
And that's not your brand of socialism. It's going to be entirely different.
It's not one with it's one with a small s.
Yeah, because we did have elements of socialism in certain sectors of the economy.
Yeah.
We've had that for decades, but we still have companies and so forth, and we had capital. But now, as more and more small businesses are going out of business, you're going to have just a few monopolies in existence or a few oligarchs. And from there, it's just a small jump to socialism, really, to total government control of the means of production, which is
Well,
what socialism is.
yes, that's because the majority of the wealth, as you well know, and I have to tell you, is concentrated on a tiny, tiny, tiny number of people, individuals,
Yes,
which is
of
never,
course.
never a healthy thing anyway, no
I
matter.
mean, how many people in this country have gone out of business? It's a long list, medium to small mom and pop businesses, but Amazon is thriving, Costco, Target, Walmart, and all of these big giants, to the detriment of all these small businesses.
And the same with our social media as well, we're very restricted in what we can, I suppose, say on social media anymore, or post on social media, or have a free range of thoughts on our social media platforms. We're all very, very, very careful because we'll be shut down.
Yeah, that's a form of socialism. When I lived in Romania, they really had to employ a huge army of informers to spy on their population, and everybody had a big folder. I know I found mine after communism was defeated, so to speak. But now with technology, they don't have to put forth any effort. They
No.
just do it just like that all the time.
Well, Ileana, it's been an absolute fantastic. We'll have to do a part two on it because we only scratched the surface.
We
We'll have
didn't
to,
talk about Agenda 2030.
we didn't even talk about that. We'll come back in a few weeks' time and take part two, if that's okay with you.
That's wonderful. I would love to do that.
But for this edition of LiR Confidential and LiRmedia.tv, from our very special guest, Ileana Johnson in Washington, it's been a pleasure. And thank you very much, Ileana, and the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for having me. And until next time.
Indeed.